What if I told you that the most powerful barriers to Black wealth in America aren't carved in stone or written in bold letters, but instead quietly hidden in city maps, tax codes, and legal doctrines? For generations, overt signs of racial exclusion like whites only blatantly told Black Americans where they weren't welcome. But even after such signs came down, a quieter, more insidious system remained. Policies no longer had to mention race for them to have racial outcomes. And one of the most foundational tools in this system? Zoning laws. Zoning may sound like mundane city planning. It's the process of separating spaces for homes, businesses, and industry. But behind its technical language lies a crucial force that determines who builds wealth and who gets left behind. Take single-family zoning, for example. This policy reserves large swaths of residential land for one house per lot. Sounds innocent enough, right? But in practice, it blocks the development of more affordable housing like duplexes or apartment buildings. That means only those who can afford a single-family home, usually wealthier, usually whiter families, gain access to these desirable neighborhoods. Meanwhile, families with lower incomes, which often includes Black and brown households, are disproportionately priced out. Let's look at Minneapolis. For decades, over 75% of its residential land was restricted to single-family homes. This made building duplexes, triplexes, or other multifamily housing illegal in most parts of the city, effectively shutting out middle and working-class families from areas that were appreciating in value. By the time the city finally scrapped single-family zoning in 2018, prices in those once exclusive neighborhoods had already skyrocketed, rising over 50% since 2000. So while the reform looked progressive on paper, the damage had already been done. Generations of potential Black homeowners were excluded from the wealth those neighborhoods created. Zoning laws didn't just deny wealth-building opportunities, they also exposed Black communities to harm. Take Pleasantville in Houston, a historically Black neighborhood zoned as light industrial. Sounds harmless? Think again. That label allowed trucking depots, warehouses, and chemical plants to surround homes. That meant higher pollution, noise, traffic, and health risks. According to a 2020 study by Rice University, Pleasantville home values are 35% lower than similar neighborhoods not zoned for industrial use. So not only did zoning keep Black families out of wealthy areas, it also pulled down the value of the few homes they could buy. And zoning laws do more than shape where people live, they influence where businesses can open. For Black entrepreneurs trying to set up shop, restrictive zoning and permitting rules often made it nearly impossible to break into high-value commercial areas. In contrast, big chains with deep pockets were often granted exceptions. That created a double bind. Black-owned businesses were choked by red tape in undervalued areas, while chains rapidly expanded elsewhere, further extracting value from communities. Once these zoning patterns are drawn, they're hard to undo. Industrial zones rarely turn into vibrant residential neighborhoods, and established residential enclaves push back hard against new housing. So the structures stay in place, silently influencing outcomes for decades. Next in the chain, tax policy, the subtle system that determines how much wealth families get to keep after they've managed to build any in the first place. Let's start with one of the biggest tax breaks in the country, the mortgage interest deduction. It lets homeowners deduct the interest they pay on their mortgage from their taxable income, but it disproportionately benefits higher-income households. 80% of these benefits go to households making $100,000 or more. Who owns the homes in these income brackets? Largely white families in high-value neighborhoods. Meanwhile, Black families, many pushed into undervalued neighborhoods by historic zoning and lending discrimination, get significantly less from this deduction, even when they follow all the rules and pay their mortgages on time. Another area is the tax code's treatment of income. If you earn wages, you pay regular income tax. But if you earn money from investments like stocks, rental properties, and capital gains, you're taxed at a lower rate. Since Black families were systematically excluded from these investment avenues for generations, they are much less likely to benefit. In fact, in 2020, only 34% of Black families own stocks, compared to 61% of white families. Even when wealth is successfully built, the tax code plays favorites when it's passed down. Wealthy families benefit from inheritance loopholes like the step-up in basis, which resets the value of inherited assets to current market value, essentially erasing years of taxable gains. Since Black families have historically had less to pass down, they don't get the same tax protection. The average white heir receives nearly $200,000. The average Black heir? Just $100,000. Small Black-owned businesses face similar inequities. Many tax credits and benefits are available only to businesses with access to development zones, startup capital, and complex accounting, resources not often accessible to entrepreneurs already fighting uphill battles in disadvantaged areas. So even when Black families overcome one layer of the system, like buying a home or starting a business, the tax structure chips away at that progress. But the chain doesn't stop there. What if someone else wants the land your family has held for generations? Enter the legal system, a powerful force that has enabled the displacement of Black communities under the guise of public good. Historically, we saw this through racially restrictive covenants, legal contracts embedded in property deeds that barred selling to Black families and other minorities. Though enforced for decades, these covenants were struck down in 1948 in Shelley v. Kramer, but by then the damage was done. White families had already bought into neighborhoods that would see enormous appreciation, while Black families were locked out, often permanently. A UCLA study from 2017 found that properties originally protected by these covenants still had 60% higher values than those that weren't. Following that came eminent domain, a legal mechanism allowing governments to seize private property for public use. Often it was Black communities that paid the price. In St. Paul, Minnesota, the construction of Interstate 94 destroyed the thriving Black neighborhood of Rondo. 80% of Rondo's residents were displaced, and in today's dollars, $157 million in property wealth vanished overnight. Similar stories unfolded in Detroit, Miami, and New Orleans, where vibrant communities were bulldozed with legal approval. More modern versions of this exist as well. Cities use blight designations, labels for supposed urban decay, to clear neighborhoods and attract developers. These labels are disproportionately applied to Black neighborhoods, including areas that are stable and home to long-term residents. Once a neighborhood is labeled as blighted, laws allow cities to fast-track its demolition, and property values crash. Land is bought up cheap, redeveloped, and sold back at a premium, usually to white newcomers. Even banks played a role. During the 2008 housing crisis, Black families were disproportionately pushed into subprime mortgages, higher risk, high-interest loans, despite often qualifying for safer ones. When the market collapsed, Black households lost 53% of their wealth, compared to 16% for white households. Again, legally justifiable but devastating in effect. All of these laws and policies weren't just mistakes. When layered together, zoning, tax policy, and legal precedent, they became a wealth-stripping machine. Families lost homes, businesses, and property, not once but across generations. And generational wealth isn't about luxury, it's about stability. A home passed down can help pay for college, start a business, or get through a financial emergency. When that chain is broken, each generation starts over. Let's return to Rondo. The destruction didn't just harm the families who lived there at the time. It denied their children and grandchildren the kind of mobility that family wealth makes possible. While wealthier, often white suburbs passed homes through inheritance, with growing property values, displaced Black families had nothing to pass on. This pattern repeats nationwide. Study after study shows that even when Black families do everything right, earn degrees, buy homes, launch businesses, they still experience slower and smaller returns. A house in a historically redlined neighborhood might appreciate by $80,000 over 50 years. A house in a historically white suburb? $300,000 or more. That appreciation gap becomes the difference between passing wealth and passing struggle. Today, these systems have evolved to be even harder to fight. Urban revitalization projects come wrapped in language about transportation access and economic growth, but the effect often looks just like gentrification: increased housing costs, community displacement, and wealth flowing out instead of in. Financial tools have also adapted. Predatory rent-to-own housing schemes market to families denied mortgages, offering fake paths to ownership riddled with high fees and penalties that often end in repossession. Meanwhile, credit scoring algorithms penalize those who face systemic injustices already, like inconsistent rent records, medical debt, or zip codes associated with high-risk areas. In other words, the forces draining Black wealth haven't disappeared. They've been modernized. Today, the losses aren't always written into law. They're built into software, policy, and procedure. They're not acknowledged, but they are deeply felt. The average white family today holds nearly 8 times as much wealth as the average black family. That's not an accident. It's the product of systems, clever, complex, invisible systems that had a design. The question isn't whether discrimination continues in America. That's clear. The question is, how do we dismantle the architecture of inequality when it's buried under layers of jargon, data, and policy? Let's keep this conversation going. Imagine how different America would be today if black wealth hadn't been stolen, blocked, or erased. How many more black-owned banks, bookstores, neighborhoods, and cultural institutions could have thrived? Because this isn't just about the past, it's about the future. And that future depends on us recognizing and rewriting the rules of the game. Stay tuned to the channel and join us in uncovering the untold stories of Black excellence, resilience, and truth. Let's rethink what equity truly means.